So what we're going to talk about today is the black spot work we did in the first is that with rose breed work. We did Texas trials, and we had them 2 locations, and we had them both at Overton, which is East Texas, and in College Station, of course. Also, again, talk a little about Cercospora, because we did evaluations for both black spot and Cercospora in these both locations. And this was part of the rose breed too. Now, it just happens I use the same plots with the same materials I used for RRD, and we planted them in College Station and for Somerville and East Texas to do the evaluation for the fungus issues. Now, also involved in this work was the University of Minnesota, and they worked on the dominant gene or vertical gene or whatever else you want to call it. A lot of different names, the RDR genes. And Dave Slezak, I guess we'll talk about that next. And so those are 2 locations. They do differ with respect to their precipitation, with East Texas getting a little more precipitation than we do. And if you look at this, now that table indicates low incidence with respect to the groups of varieties, low incidence, average, and high incidence, and gives you the ratings. Now the ratings are 0 to 9 scale. So in low, it was 1.8 at Somerville, and Overton 3. So that would be about 3 would be an average about 30% of the foliage having some lesions for black spot. So it's not immune. There's less black spot there. And then average 3 and 4, and then in the high group at Somerville, which is where we are, about 40% of the foliage on average. Now it varies quite a bit depending on the month. And in Overton, it was about 50–60%. So again, there's the incidence rating scale we did on percent of leaves with black spot. We ignored or didn't take into account the defoliation when we did this. We did that separately. Okay, so this is just the leaves on the plant that have percent of leaves on the plant that have some lesions. And so if you look at so in College Station, we did monthly ratings for 3 years. In Overton, they didn't do as many ratings. They did 2 to 3 times per year. So it's a little different. So the data is a little different, but you'll see it more or less corresponds to each other. That's how it bumped up and down. And so in this, the upper line is the more susceptible ones with the higher incidence, and then the lower line is the lower incidence. So you can see the average over the years. This is all 3 years there. Give you an idea of how they differentiated most months. If you look at correlations, just to give you an idea of how the data laid, if you looked at the correlation between the ratings of the same varieties in Somerville versus Overton on that top line, you see it was about 0.6, okay? If you looked at correlation between black spot ratings and defoliation ratings, it's about 0.5. So there's some correlation there. If we do the genetic analysis, we'll find separate loci. Some loci for black spot and defoliation coincide, others do not. So it's not completely linked. Black spot versus Cercospora, negative correlation, so they're the opposite, and we'll talk about that genetically later. And then black spot and flower intensity, it's slightly negative, which would be expected. Now, I'm not going to go through all these varieties. I'm just going to give you a really quick through here because we don't want to spend a lot of time. I'll do summary later. So these are the low black spot incidence materials, and there's a lot here at Somerville because and I did the same thing as I did with Rose Rosette. I took the data, did what do you call it? A mixed model, And then I separated them into better than average, average, and worse than average. Okay, so this would be the better than average with respect to black spot incidence. And this is recorded, so you can look at this later. This will be published. I'm working on that. If you look at Overton, so the first one was College Station. In Overton, there is less than the better than average group, which you might expect. The higher incidence there. So it separated them out a little better. But again, the correlations were still pretty good. And if you put them both together, this is what you get that are better than average at both sites. Okay, I'm sure the STAR people are delighted. Knockout is actually there. But Miracle and Hudson, also happy. Candio. There's various things from various different breeding programs here. Some I expected, some I did not. So that was very interesting to see. Now, again, I want to go back to the origin of resistance to sort of give you an idea of where this stuff is coming from. And again, here we have the European Chinese group. Now, this is a different diagram because we have different materials, so it's different from the IRD. So the European Chinese group is over there, the Burgossia Carolina, and the multiflora Wichuriana, the three major germplasm groups used in breeding. And so here's where the resistance was. Okay, so you have resistance really spread along a lot of different areas. And if you look at that with respect to the major groups, you see very little in the European Chinese area. Okay, there's one variety that's been bred, I think it was a Cordis variety, and of course they've been selecting extensively for that sort of thing. You see up at the upper corner right next to that, the Burgossia Carolina group. Okay, a lot of resistance in that group. And then over here with the Wichurian and multiflora group, all those things along that curve down there, they have integressions from the Carolina or the multiflora Wichuriana group. So again, that's a major source of resistance for black spot. So you sort of give an idea where this stuff is coming from. So that was kind of interesting from a breeding point of view to see where things were coming from. Looking at Cercospora real quick, and don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but again, the same sort of thing. You see the incidence at Somerville, which is where we are, is a little lower than Overton. And of course, we did monthly, which some of those months were very low disease incidence. Okay, we had the same range of disease, but the averages are a little lower at Somerville versus Overton. Sort of like we saw before, again, greater precipitation. You'd expect a little more fungal issues. Again, the same rating with respect to percent of leaves with lesions, and the same schedule of ratings. Okay, now the correlations, Somerville versus Overton, it was much higher correlation here than with the black spot. Black spot's a little more variable. You see Cercospora is not, it's not positively correlated with defoliation. It's a little slightly negative. Cercospora and black spot, again, the same negative correlation. And Cercospora and flower intensity, very low correlation, really doesn't have a lot to do with it. Again, looking at the low Cercospora incidence in Somerville, those are the varieties you see there. About 18 or so varieties that really didn't have much Cercospora. And now these are very low compared to a lot of things because our incidence was really not that high. But if you look at Overton, there's a larger. Now at Overton, we had a higher Cercospora. And so there's a lot more variability to sort of stretch things out. And so these are better than average. But most of them do have some Cercospora. And of course, you put that together, you get the smaller list. Okay, so these are pretty consistent, both sites and what have you. Okay, so let's go to this again. I reminded you of the three different groups. You go to where Cercospora resistance is found. Now that looks a lot different from black spot, of course. That's sort of what we saw in the correlation. Very different. See, now here you're seeing Cercospora resistance in the hybrid Ts. So it seems to be coming from the European group. And so if you look at that, the European group, that's where a lot of your resistance is. It's also in the Rugosa Carolina group. Okay. So if you look at the multiflora Returniana group, they tend to be very susceptible. Okay. So you need to get these resistances from different groups of germplasm and combine them, which is always an interesting breeding proposition. And then, so if you look at this, this is resistance on, let me see, you have your black spot. I guess those are the black, and the blue is your Cercospora. And if you put your Rugosa or your RRD there, that's on the inside would be RRD resistance. So you can see there's not many things with multiple resistance combined yet. This would be fairly high resistance. There's a few things, but most of it's from different sources and what have you. So in this project, we need to stack these genes together. And so we'll be combining a lot of different things from different sources of germplasm. And the proposal is to use, you know, molecular genomic tools to help us with that. And in the afternoon, Oscar's going to talk a lot more about that. And so for our project this time, that was the last project, so that's what we learned. Of course, we know the long-term goal. And so again, we planted these in Texas, the same populations as we did for IRD again, but again, in Texas, we'll be looking at the fungal diseases. And again, the source of resistance that we've seen in the previous one was RDR4, and we located another variety or another source as well, and we'll talk about that. But this one, we've incorporated Miracle and the Hudson in the crosses to see if we can figure out the source of resistance there and whether it's different from the ones we've seen. And then we're using Frudagmar Hastrop in one cross that was developed in Minnesota and Wisconsin. We want to look at for general resistance as well. And so we'll look at that, and that'd be a different source of resistance for the black spot. Again, numbers, again, in the evaluation trials with varieties and selections, about 250 unique roses, 146 selections, 104 rose cultivars, all replicated in that trial. And then we know there's available genes out there, RDR1 and 3 and 4, we've already identified. Their Minnesota people are identifying other ones, and they'll talk about that. We've identified LG3 plus others, and we'll talk about that in the afternoon, all the details of that. And of course, we're looking for additional genes now. And additional RDR genes, which would be the vertical genes from Rambling Red, Baby Love, and Hansa. And horizontal, hopefully from Miracle of Hudson, hopefully they have a different one or a different confirmation of those genes. So we'll learn more and more about that. Again, genetic populations, you've seen this slide before, the same one we have for RRD. So we designed them to work for all these diseases and get as much as we can from those materials. We have about 1,600 plants in the genetic study at College Station that we're looking at. And I think that's all I've wanted to say. And I'd like to, if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer one quick question. Then we need to move to Dave on the RD. Yeah, one quick question.
Correlation between black spot defoliation, that's not surprising. What came in first? So if plants defoliated, how much foliage was left on those? What's the cost for it to develop them?
We had to be very careful about our evaluations, yes. Some were very hard to evaluate because there was not very much foliage there. But we have all the defoliation ratings, so we could separate that out if we want to.
There wouldn't be a whole lot left.
No. And in some cases, especially with black spot,
Y'all can stop.
No, in some instances, there's complete defoliation, and in the regrowth, there's no black spot, so it looks like it's resistant, but it's not, because it's already been completely defoliated and
Negative correlation between the two diseases.
yeah. No, yeah, I think there's genetic reasons for that negative correlation too.